Porsche's Macan is no stranger to success. From its debut, it has been a benchmark in the compact luxury SUV space. But given its positioning in India, it had a tough time, as it felt more like a reskinned Q5 than a scaled-down Cayenne for that price. But now it's gone fully electric, so the chances are probably better. But does it really have that Porsche edge, or is it just an Audi Q6 e-tron in a Stuttgart suit? Let's find out. Now, we recently drove the Audi Q6 and the SQ6 e-tron, and I was pretty impressed with the vehicle. After a long time, it felt like Audi had delivered something that felt completely new, completely purposeful, not something that was an evolution of an existing product. And it isn't hard to see why. They had all the technical help and support that they needed from Porsche to create that premium electric platform, which is why the Q6 is so good. But in fact, it turned out to be so good, I started wondering, do you even need to stretch to a Macan now that even the Macan has gone all electric? Well, that's exactly what we are here to find out. Porsche said, why don't you just come over to Dubai, drive the car, and find out for yourself if it has the Porsche edge or not. So let's do just that. At first glance, the Macan Turbo EV is unmistakably Porsche. Its design philosophy leans heavily on elegance rather than excess. Well, in my Audi review, I also said that I think the Q6 or the SQ6 actually looks better than the Macan, which I still stand by. I think in certain angles it still looks quite nice, but that can be a bit too radical for a lot of people. For the traditionalists, you're going to love the typical silhouette that you get with the Macan. It's a typical Porsche silhouette. The low-slung front, the iconic quad LED headlights, and a clean rear fascia. It's all very Porsche. And that I quite like. And like I said, the overall silhouette, the lines, the shape, everything clearly tells you it's a Porsche. And there are a few radical bits, like these wheels that you see, painted in the same color as the bodywork. And I think that looks quite good. Maybe I might choose a different paint if I was going for one, but having the wheels in the same color as the bodywork, that's something. And while I said that the silhouette of the vehicle is typical Porsche, you will notice that the shape is slightly different than the outgoing Macan. Yes, outgoing. There were reports that the Macan ICE, the older one, was going to coexist with the new one only for a certain time. It's going to go for good and there'll be no other ICE Macan, at least for now. This is going to be EV only. So this has a different shape than that Macan to essentially get better aerodynamics and more range. With the change in shape, they are able to get about 80 to 90 kilometers on top of the range than what the older Macan shape would have achieved. A drag coefficient of 0.25 places it ahead of its SQ6 sibling, so its form and function in perfect harmony. Usually the Macan EV retains a nice clean form, but when you're in that sportier mood, the spoiler pops up and tells the whole world about your mood. But because we're talking about the tailgate, let me also go nitpicking. I don't like this little wedge here which sort of acts as a shade for the reversing camera and also the tailgate switch. I think they could have done something a little bit better. This looks like an eyesore on an otherwise clean design for the rest of the car. And because this is an SUV, we need to talk about practicality, and there is a fair bit of it. With again, a few things that stick out like a sore thumb, like this space saver wheel. Now in India, the situation is going to be something similar. Your space saver or your space wheel, the spare wheel is going to be on the boot floor itself because there is no space underneath that. You have space for your luggage, etc. You have a 40-20-40 split for the seats, so there is that added versatility even if you want to carry longer items, etc. Now the boot floor, especially on the turbo or depending on what audio system you go with, is also going to pack in a subwoofer underneath. But honestly, you don't have to worry too much about it because other paraphernalia like the charging equipment, etc. can actually go in the front because there is also a frunk for this car, just like the Taycan. The Macan EV has the kind of cabin that makes you feel instantly at home. The fit, finish and material choices are all quintessentially Porsche no matter what options you take. Every surface feels meticulously crafted. Oh, and there are plenty of options. The moment you step in, it's a typical Porsche interior, more so if you are already well versed with what the Taycan looks like. So you get that typical Porsche steering wheel with that little switch on the steering that is going to also let you cycle between the different drive modes. The fit and finish, as you would expect, is typical Porsche. And then you get these three massive screens a big 12-inch screen in the center, 10.9-inch screens on the side. Yes, the passenger also gets a screen, and it's got that privacy layer on top so that it doesn't distract the driver. Now, these are things that you're familiar with. But here is where the Porsche edge comes with respect to the Q6. Now, the moment I sit in with these sports seats, this is a turbo after all, it quickly just hugs you. The contours all move in, it hugs you nicely so that you get that proper driving posture. And then the steering and everything just falls so beautifully in your hands. The way you want to, have that proper sports car kind of feel, you get that. Why am I saying this? Well, because it doesn't feel like an SUV. You don't feel like you're sitting atop the steering and the seat and you're getting that commanding view of the road. No, everything just envelops around you. The dashboard, the steering, even this center console, the tunnel console, everything nicely wraps around you, gives you that nice enveloped feel. And I quite like it. It just adds to the whole drama. It feels like a proper Porsche. It doesn't feel like just a luxury electric SUV, and that's a good thing in my books. The panoramic sunroof adds an airy vibe to the cabin, while the rear seats offer surprising levels of comfort and legroom. Now, despite the coupe-ish roofline that you see on the outside, the headroom actually is surprisingly good. That is one thing that I was worried about, but you see the kind of headroom that I get. I think the foot space, the knee room, the leg space, everything is quite good. Now, that is one complaint that we had with the outgoing Macan, that the rear felt a little cramped, especially if you are a tall person. So here again, for a 6-footer, it's still going to be a little close, but it's not going to be claustrophobic. Let's put it that way. Again, the contouring, I really like it. It's not too firm, not too plush. So over long distance journeys, it shouldn't be a problem at all. You get AC vents at the back, you also get this big center armrest, you have cup holders, and then you have a contouring that is really nice and comfortable. It's still got that sports car vibe where it again hugs you, not as tightly as the front seats, but it does hug you quite well. So overall, I quite like it. It's a nice place to be in. The Macan EV has the Porsche edge on the road as well. So apart from the seating posture that I spoke of, where you feel like you are sitting in a slightly elevated sports car and not so much like a proper SUV or something, which is a good thing, the other bits where the Macan has the Porsche edge are well with the powertrain as well. I'll come to that in a bit. What also adds to the cabin experience is that you can have a sporty soundtrack playing inside the cabin. Synthesized, of course. It's an EV after all. Nowhere close to what a typical Porsche ICE would sound like, but it still sets the mood for the driving fun. Now, in terms of the mechanicals, you have two motors. There's one at the front, one at the rear. But if you were to draw parallels between the turbo and the SQ6, the one at the front is a PSM, a synchronous motor, whereas the SQ6 is running an asynchronous motor. And if you were to look at the placement of the motor at the rear, on the SQ6, it sits in front of the rear axle, whereas in the Macan, it sits behind the rear axle. It is to sort of get better weight distribution, mimic the effects of what you get with a 911 essentially, right? So that is what they are going with here. What you also get is a single-step transmission, unlike the two-step that you get in, say, the Taycan. And the tuning of the motors, the way they put down power, all of that, the torque vectoring, which is only on the turbo, all of that is also very differently tuned than the Audi to give you that performance edge. The dual motor setup is where the Macan EV flexes its engineering muscle then. It doesn't get the push-to-pass function like the Taycan, but it gets launch control. So go pedal to the metal, and this turbo variant will live up to that holy badge even though there is no turbocharger. You get a 0 to 100 km/h time of 3.3 seconds. That's a full second quicker than the SQ6. While the better weight distribution contributes to a sharper, more engaging driving experience. Does it all work? Well, I would say it does. I can't completely back that fact yet because we are driving in Dubai on pretty much straight roads. The only curves that we've come across are the roundabouts. But I'm sure, the way the car behaves, it's definitely going to be a hoot to drive. Especially if I remember how good the SQ6 was. All these little additions that Porsche have done should make it a better driver's car than the SQ6. Now, when we are talking handling, let's also talk suspension. While the SQ6 employs a one-valve or single-valve setup, the suspension on the Macan uses a dual-valve setup. So that also helps them fine-tune the suspension a lot better to your driving needs. In terms of the regenerative braking, however, you don't get any modes to choose from. The way the regeneration is going to function is tied into the different driving modes that you have, but it primarily functions or comes into play only when you actually use the physical brake pedal. And speaking of the brake pedal, it feels absolutely natural because the way they have tied in the regenerative braking with the physical braking, just the way we saw with the Q6 or the SQ6 e-tron, you can't really tell where the handover point is. The turbo setup is noticeably sportier, while the 4S variant is more comfort-oriented. Porsche's torque vectoring tech further elevates the cornering precision, and the 4S is an excellent handler too. Even the steering feels better tuned than Audi's. It's precise, well-weighted, and delivers excellent feedback. The steering tuning is even better, and there is a noticeable difference between the 4S and the turbo. The 4S feeling slightly more convenient, slightly lighter, slightly easier, whereas the turbo just feels a little bit more weighted, a little bit more direct, a little bit more evolved. Despite being an electric SUV, the Macan feels light on its feet. The weight of the batteries is cleverly masked thanks to Porsche's meticulous chassis tuning. One thing that we liked on the Audi was the big augmented reality heads-up display. So you get something similar here with the Macan as well. Now Porsche says it's as good in terms of aspect ratio as an 87-inch television that is projected on the road in front of you. It's full color, of course. The navigation also works with Apple CarPlay. It will give you the turn-by-turn instructions on the heads-up display, even if you are hooked up to CarPlay or Android Auto. What it cannot do, however, is give you the blue arrows exactly where you need to go in, it's that 3D navigation and all of that. That it cannot do with the Apple CarPlay. For that, you'll have to use the onboard navigation system. It looks straight out of a sci-fi film, and I love it. In fact, I really like most of the things in the new Macan. The in-cabin experience is really good, and the experience from behind the wheel is excellent too. And if I was going the EV route, it would definitely be on my list of considerations if I didn't want to stretch all the way to the Taycan. I wish we had tighter roads to explore its limits though, but based on what I felt, this little SUV will shine on twisty roads and still work obediently even on our road conditions. Porsche's ride-handling balance is unmatched, and that's true even for this vehicle. The Macan Turbo EV feels taut yet compliant. It always feels ready for the spirited drives and the long-distance journeys alike, and it even supports advanced fast charging for when you want to go that distance, irrespective of the variant that you choose. Let's sum it up then. I said in my Q6 review that if you were to just settle for the Q6 or the SQ6, it's just fine because it's a really, really good car. However, if you're willing to stretch to the Macan, it could make a lot of difference. Yes, on paper, if you were to compare the SQ6 to the Turbo, all those little enhancements that the Porsche brings to the table may not sound like big. But if you're a driving enthusiast, you'll know exactly how big they are. It may seem like a small edge, but the moment you get behind the wheel, you understand that that edge, that advantage is huge. Any driving enthusiast is going to appreciate each and every meticulous detail that has gone into the Macan over the SQ6. And at 1.6 crore rupees, a car that does not to 100 in 3.3 seconds? Tell me another car that does that at that price point. I can't think of any. I think this is damn good value for money, especially when you get this badge for that money.